I'm Cliff Ribner, and I'm going to tell you some things I didn't mention about socialism in my last video on that subject. Do you want to be a socialist? That was the name of the video. And I'll tell you what they are, and I'll talk about them in this video. First of all, socialism always rules by terror. There's no other way for it to happen because they destroy all private incentives, because they don't believe you have the right to anything. They don't believe you have any property rights or any individual liberty. Any liberty they let you have, any property they let you have, is just what they think they can let you have. And the politicians run everything. It's not the market that runs everything. In a market economy, people get rich because they provide other people with goods and services that those people want. In a socialist economy, people get rich because they're involved with the government and they help the government steal stuff from other people. They can be intermediaries like lawyers and lobbyists who get paid. That's why the 5 wealthiest counties in the country are the 5 counties surrounding Washington, D.C. now. None of those people produce anything of value, nothing. All they do is they intermediate between government bureaucrats and other politicians. Everyone involved in the government is a politician, whether they're elected or not. They are serving themselves, they have offices, and they have power. And that's what they want. They're not serving anybody but themselves. Anyway, socialists don't believe in profit. They think profit is evil. Profit is what makes the economy. Well, I'm going to summarize the things. They don't believe in profit. They don't believe you have the right to property. They believe they have the right to impose terror on you, to enforce what they want. And they don't believe that there's any type of power other than the power of violence. They think the power of violence is the only way to get people to do anything. And the one thing the government can do, the reason socialists love government, is because government has one power and one power alone. It can't create anything. Anything it gives people, it's taken from someone else. But what it can do, it can monopolize violence to keep us from killing each other. That's the one benefit of government. It's the rule of law when it's done fairly and impartially. That's what we call justice. But the only way justice gets done is under due process in courts, not by bureaucrats dishing it out. In a socialist economy, which is largely what we have now in America, it's not a straightforward socialist economy. The government has not actually stolen all the property owners' businesses. But what they've done, and the way they do it in, say, Castro's Cuba or in the Soviet Union. So the government is not a monopoly in that sense. It doesn't own everything. What it does own is all the power. It owns the ability. They have all these agencies which pass regulations. Each of those agencies monopolizes all 3 powers of government: legislative, judicial, and executive. They make laws. They call them regulations. They call them regulations because they can't call them laws, because the Constitution, Article 1, Section 7, has very specific procedures for what has to happen for a law to be a real law, a legal law. But they pass those regulations. Congress has created this fiction called the Administrative Procedure Act, which lets them think they can get away with creating these things which have the force of law, but they don't call them laws. They call them regulations because they know that they don't qualify as laws. But try telling that to someone who had to pay a huge fine or ended up getting prosecuted by the Justice Department. And that gives you an idea of how socialism really is enforced. It's not enforced voluntarily. It's enforced by terror. And the way it's done in America is through the terror of these administrative agencies and prosecutions and investigations. You get investigated and you're ruined. Have you ever been audited by the IRS? Have you ever heard of anybody getting audited by the IRS? That's a benign investigation compared to the stuff these other ones do. And they keep it all hidden. The only people who really know about the horror that goes on with those investigations are the people immediately under the jurisdiction of those agencies. And they can't talk about it, because if they tell people what they had to go through, those agencies would come down on them. And basically, the investigation is the punishment. It's the terror. And that's how it's enforced. In a market economy, everything is enforced because people obey the law. And the courts administer laws after the fact. If you break, you don't have to go to a court to ask them if you can do something. If you do something bad, or if somebody sues you, you get a jury, or sometimes just a judge, who gets to decide after due process whether you should have to pay someone something else. Under socialism, it's all just whatever those agencies want. And that's what we have in America. It's bureaucratic socialism. Bureaucracies are inherently socialist. That's just the way it is. They are collectivist organizations. Nobody in them does anything of value. They all serve their own interests. Anyway, socialists don't believe in profit, which means if in the socialist paradise, nothing gets produced the way the buyers really want it to be, because the only choice you have is what the companies who have to deal with all these bureaucrats end up producing. All of the products that are made today, except for the internet. The internet is the one part of the economy that hasn't been completely controlled by bureaucrats in Washington. And that's the only place there's been any innovation for the last 50 years. But all the other products, every detail of the design and the manufacturing of every product in America is dictated by bureaucrats in Washington. So companies making products have to spend 95% of their time just complying with regulations. You ever been in a bank? 90% of the people in the bank are not bankers. They're just people who comply with regulations, because banks are subject to dozens and dozens of agencies. They can't do anything without asking 3 different agencies if they can do it. Anyway, socialists don't believe in private property. I read you what Karl Marx has to say. They specifically don't believe you have any right to property. It's just whatever they let you have, they being politicians and bureaucrats. And they only believe in the power of violence. They don't believe in market power. Market power is what happens. The idea is, in any transaction, there's a buyer and a seller. We know that the seller gets a profit, because if he didn't, he'd go out of business. If he can't get a profit from customers, he goes out of business. And the way we measure his profit is the difference between what it costs him to make the product and what he sells it for. But the buyer, this is the mistake socialists make, buyers also have profit. Otherwise, they wouldn't do the transaction. Nobody's forcing them to buy anything. And it's all voluntary. And the profit in the buyer's mind is purely subjective. It's the difference in his mind of the value between what he's paying and what he's getting. And that exists, or else he wouldn't do the transaction. Adam Smith showed that when that occurs, it not only that when profit occurs, it not only increases the wealth of the seller and the buyer, both of them increase the wealth of the nation, which makes it possible for money to be created. Because when the money is backed by real assets, which can include what that profit is, which is subjective. When the money is backed by that, it's hard money, unlike the money that we have, which is just whatever the government says it's worth, except the government can't do it. The Fed was formed in 1913 because they promised that they would end all booms and busts and they'd keep the dollar sound, except the dollar had never lost a penny of value before the Fed. And since the Fed, I don't know what it is today, but as of 4 years ago, the dollar was worth 1/23 of what it was in 1913. And there have been the worst booms and the worst busts in the economy since the Fed. The Great Depression, all those recessions, they all happened, and they were all basically caused by those regulatory agencies. And anyway, they don't believe you have the right to property. They don't believe anyone has the right to profit because they think profit is evil. And they believe they have the right to tell you whatever you want to hear and to lie to you. It's all fraud. They make promises they can't keep. They rule by terror, and everything is inferior. Remember in the night, what most of you aren't old enough to know, in the 1960s, all the cars looked different. Now they all look the same. Have you noticed that? All the cars, no matter how expensive or cheap, they all look the same because every detail of their design is dictated by bureaucrats in Washington. Those are the things I wanted to tell you. And if you like what I'm saying, please follow me and refer this to other people.